Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Sunday night video. Now I'm sure that most of you will know by now my current situation with regards to the passing of my dad. So you will know why I am doing some compilation videos for the next couple of weeks. So this is a Sunday night compilation. I hope that you will enjoy it and find it interesting. It's a couple of the older stories that I covered a while ago now. So you may have seen them, you may not have seen them, you may even quite enjoy watching them again. But whatever way you look at it, I hope that you will enjoy the little couple of stories that I've added tonight. Hopefully within a couple of weeks time I will be back to normal again and I will be posting new stuff as opposed to the compilations. So I hope you'll stick with me until things get a little bit easier for me and I'm able to do that. But for now, I will see you in a bit. Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Sunday night video. This week I am covering the very strange story of the death of Police Constable William Ellison, which happened at the Howden Dock area in 1886. I hope you will find it interesting. But before we begin, if you do enjoy this video, then please give it a thumbs up, and if you are new here or haven't already done so, then do please consider subscribing to the channel to help support the content we create. Thank you. And I would also just like to add that I do record these stories live, so I do sometimes make mistakes, which I always try to rectify, so I hope this does not spoil your enjoyment of the video. On a Monday night in early June of 1886, PC William Ellison was on duty at Howden. His normal route would take in part of Willington Quay and most of Howden. He was expected to meet up with another PC at midnight, but William did not turn up. The alarm was raised and Sergeant Bell and an unnamed police officer searched the area until around 3 a.m. the following morning, but they were unable to find him. They then returned to the police station and Sergeant Bell asked PC Crisp to continue the search. And it was PC Crisp who suggested that Howden Dock should be searched. I must point out that Howden Dock is also known sometimes as Northumberland Dock, and the body of PC Ellison was found at 11 a.m. on Tuesday morning. No one could understand why he'd been at the dock, as it was not part of his beat. However, it was thought if he had seen a disturbance of any kind, then he would have been likely to go and investigate. But as with not knowing why he had not been down there, no one could understand how he had ended up in the water either. The inquest into the death of PC Ellison was held at the Black Bull Inn at Willington Quay before Coroner Lynn. Sergeant Bell said he had identified the body as being that of PC William Ellison, who was 23 years old and stationed at Willington Quay. He said he had gone on duty at 10 p.m. on the Monday night, and the last time that he had seen him had been as he left Tyne Street with Sergeant Harvey at around 10:15 p.m. He stated that PC Ellison's beat did not include the dock, it ended some 500 to 600 yards away. When asked, he said if he himself had been on duty and seen anything improper at the docks, he would have investigated, and he felt that PC Ellison would have done the same. He could not think of any other reason why PC Ellison would have been at the docks. He stated that when PC Ellison had not shown up at midnight as expected, a search of the area had taken place. All of the streets they expected him to be on were searched, but no sight of him could be found. On returning to the police station, he had passed the search duties on to PC Crisp, and it had been his decision to drag the area of Howden Dock, and this was how the body of PC Ellison had been found. James Golightly said he lived at Brunton Street in Howden, or possibly better, Willington Quay, and had seen PC Ellison at exactly 10 minutes to 11 on the night he went missing. He was very clear about this, as he said he had stopped to speak with him for a few minutes, and as he was about to leave he had asked PC Ellison what time it was. He said he could not be sure what direction he had gone after this, as he himself had gone down a passage in the street, so did not see the police officer leave. He said when he spoke to him he seemed fine and well, and they had not spoken about any issues in the area that night. Mary Dryden said she lived in Howden, close to Howden Dock. She was at her doorway on the night in question looking for her uncle, who was due home around 11:30 p.m. She said she saw P.C. Ellison heading down the street in the direction of the dock, but halfway down he suddenly stopped and headed back up again. She said he was walking quite slowly and seemed to be deep in thought, and after passing her door she said she lost sight of him and went inside a few moments later. She said she did not see anyone else in the street, but after she went inside and closed her door, she said she heard the voices of two men who passed by just a few moments after the police officer. She said she'd remained awake until her uncle finally returned home at around midnight. And when asked, she said she did not hear the sound of an argument in the street or even the sound of raised voices. She had not seen P.C. Ellison return back in the direction of the dock, and she said that he did not seem to be behaving strangely when she had seen him the first time. Joseph Spencer said he was a seaman on board the SS Mazeppa, which was at Howden Dock. He said on Monday night he had been the watchman on board the ship, and at around midnight he was sitting in the galley when 4 of the crew came on board. He said he then went to take his usual look around, and on walking along the ship on the dock side, he noticed a policeman's lantern on the dock. He went ashore taking his own lantern with him, and the policeman shouted out, "Who's there?" and he replied, "It's the night watchman." He said he then spoke for a short while with P.C. Ellison, and he told him to keep a good lookout, and Joseph said that he would do that and that he had already been told to do so earlier by the river police, and he said P.C. Ellison replied to this by saying, "That's right, it's a very strange place." He continued by saying that P.C. Ellison had asked him if they had any foreign sailors on board his ship, to which he had replied no, and the policeman then told him that he had had trouble with a foreign sailor earlier that night in one of the public houses, though he did not explain what the trouble had been. He said after this, P.C. Ellison went off in the direction of the bottom of the dock, and he himself made to return to the ship. It was then that he heard someone else move on the dock and then cough. This surprised him, as he had not seen anyone else there. He said he shone his lantern in the direction of the sound, and a man spoke, saying, "Are you the night watchman?" To which Joseph replied, "Yes," and the man then walked away, and almost immediately afterwards he saw P.C. Ellison hurrying after him. Joseph described the man as being between 30 and 35 years old, around 5'10", and wearing a coat and dark trousers with a cap on his head. He said some of the clothes looked worn, and the man did not look like someone who he would have expected to see on the dock. He said he did not see him again after this, and a short time after this he heard what he thought was the faint sound of a whistle, but could not say where it came from. He stated that the men who came on board ship did not leave again until morning, and that he did not hear the sound of a disturbance on the dock at any time, nor did he hear the sound of someone falling into the water. He had been on the deck all night, and had several times shone his light towards the dock and did not see anyone around. He ended by saying that the body that Sergeant Bell had identified earlier as being P.C. Ellison was the same man that he had seen that night on the dock. And when asked, he said that P.C. Ellison had been perfectly sober when he had spoken to him, and seemed to be in a jolly mood. P.C. Crisp said that during his search he had looked around the area of Howden Dock, and it was here that he had found the helmet, lamp and belt belonging to P.C. Ellison. These were all lying just a few yards away from the SS Mazeppa. The helmet was crushed as if it had been trodden on, and the belt appeared to have been cut in 2 places, and the lamp had fallen on the ground and cracked the glass. Because of where he found these items, he asked for the dock to be dragged, which was done immediately, and by 11 a.m. the body of P.C. Ellison was found. P.C. Crisp stated that when found, he was fully dressed apart from the items found on the dock. He had his truncheon clasped in his hand as if he had been about to use it. The leather strap was still around his wrist. Inspector Crozier of Wallsend said he had examined the body of P.C. Ellison shortly after he had been found. His pockets contained 2 pocket knives, a watch, a bunch of keys, and around 2 shillings in money. The watch, he said, had stopped at around 12:10. He said he was fully dressed in his uniform, and that there were 2 cuts on his coat close to where his belt would have been, and also another further up. No other marks on his clothing had been found, and he said the boots worn by P.C. Ellison matched the marks on his helmet, as if he had stepped on it after it had fallen from his head. Mr. Guthrie, a watchmaker who was also one of the jurymen, examined the watch belonging to P.C. Ellison. He said it had not been fully wound, but it would have kept going for some time after midnight. He stated that a watch would stop around 5 minutes after it was placed in water. This, it seems, would suggest that P.C. Ellison had entered the water at around 5 minutes past midnight, assuming of course that the watch was showing the correct time and was not previously running fast or slow. Dr. Burden of Wilton Key said he had examined the body of P.C. Ellison and could only find a few marks on his face and body. There were a couple of marks on his face, one being a small bruise on the left forehead and a small mark on the left temple, both of which he believed had occurred at the time of death or just prior to death. There were several superficial marks, but none of these could have resulted in his death. And Dr. Burden said he had also performed the post-mortem on the body of P.C. Ellison, and he said that internally the organs were all healthy with no signs of disease, and that it was his professional opinion that death had been caused by drowning. The coroner then spoke to the jury, stating that this was all the evidence they had available to them. There was little point in him adjourning the inquest, as the evidence had covered as much as was possible. There was at present no information to suggest any person who may have attacked P.C. Ellison and any person who may have caused him to fall into the water. The jury retired for only a short time before returning a verdict of found drowned, but they added that as to how P.C. Ellison had got into the water, there was not sufficient evidence to show. The funeral of P.C. Ellison took place on June the 10th, 1886 at Churchbank Cemetery in Wallsend, which at the time was known simply as Wallsend Cemetery. The procession left the police station at Wilton Key at 3 p.m, with the chief mourners being his father and two sisters. Many police officers followed the hearse, and the streets were lined along the route with members of the public paying their respects. It was said that a large crowd had also gathered at the cemetery itself, and great sympathy was shown to the family of P.C. Ellison. I did not find any evidence of a headstone for P.C. Ellison in Churchbank Cemetery. And this, it would seem, was the end of the case. No arrests were ever made, and no one was ever charged with causing the death of P.C. Ellison. It would sadly remain a mystery. I thought this was a very strange case. There did seem to be evidence of some kind of argument or fight that had taken place on the dockside, based on the evidence given that P.C. Ellison was holding his truncheon as if to defend himself, and also the mention of the knife marks on his clothing and that his belt had been cut. However, it seems that no suspects were ever found, and although some of the witnesses mentioned seeing other people in the area that night close to the police officer, none of them were ever identified or questioned. It would seem strange to me that a young man who was by all accounts fit, healthy and sober at the time would somehow simply manage to fall into the water and drown. Of course he may have slipped or tripped, but this does not explain why his belt and clothing were cut, or why he had his truncheon in his hand at the time. Was this possibly a case of the person who he had had trouble with in one of the public houses earlier that night following him, or vice versa, and when they met up again a fight took place and P.C. Ellison was hit on the head and fell into the water and drowned? This to me seems like the only explanation. But what do you think? Do you think this was a case of a fight taking place on the dockside and P.C. Ellison was attacked and pushed into the water, his attacker making his escape before anyone could see him? Or do you think there was any possible chance that he had simply stumbled and fallen into the water? Do let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I do hope that you have found this very sad and tragic story interesting, and I do thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again very soon. Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Sunday night video. This week I am covering the tragic story of the death of Alderman George Joblin, which happened on the railway line near Howden in 1867. This is maybe a little different to the normal stories I cover, but I hope you will still find it interesting. But before we begin, can I just say, if you do enjoy this video, then please give it a thumbs up. And if you are new here or haven't already done so, then do please consider subscribing to the channel to help support the content we create. Thank you. And I would just like to add, as I always do, that I do record these stories live, so I do sometimes make mistakes, which I always try to rectify. So I hope this does not spoil your enjoyment of the video. George Joblin was born in around 1807 near Hartley. His parents are unknown. It's not known if he had any brothers or sisters either, but it would seem unlikely that he had been an only child. At the age of around 43 years, he had married Elizabeth, and the couple had at first lived in the Ursden area before moving to Huntington Place in Tynemouth. And Elizabeth was around 4 years younger than George, and the couple did not have any children together. At the age of 19, George had lived and worked in Hartley. He was a cashier for the colliery there, and he also took care of the ships belonging to his cousin. In 1863, he had been elected as a councillor for Percy Ward in Tynemouth, and in November of 1864, he had been elected as the chief magistrate for Tynemouth. And he had also been doing the duties as mayor of Tynemouth, and I do believe that he had been elected mayor, but I did not find much information about this. And I must add in here that during my research I found details of a letter that had been written by George, which was to be sent to America. The letter was relating to the assassination of Abraham Lincoln in 1865. And it expressed the wish of the inhabitants of Tynemouth to convey their feelings of sorrow at the death of Mr. Lincoln, and also to extend their deep and sincere sympathy to Mrs. Lincoln and her family. Now, I have to say that that really wasn't something that I'd expected to find while I was looking into the life of George Joblin. George was also one of the proprietors and a director of the Bebbside, Choppington and Walker collieries. And he was also a ship owner in his own right and a member of the committee of the Marine and Friendly Association. And like many of the more notable men of the era, this was not the end. George was also one of the directors of the Blythe and Tyne Railway Company. I often, when looking at the many things people were involved in the past, wonder how they had time to fit everything in. They must have been very busy all the time, but I suppose if you had no TVs, etc., you needed plenty to fill your time, and if you were used to having money, then you needed to work a lot to have that lifestyle kept up. George was also known as a very generous man, though, doing whatever he could to help the poor. He was known to give out coal during the winter months to those most in need to make sure that their homes were kept warm. And it would probably be safe to say that he was someone who would have been very, very well thought of in Tynemouth. On December the 8th, 1867, George had been visiting his cousin who lived at Point Pleasant near Wallsend. And it is all part of Wallsend now, but it was probably just classed as near Wallsend then. And his cousin at the time was suffering from ill health. He had arrived in the afternoon around 4 p.m. and left again around 8:30 p.m. with plans to catch the train at Howden back to his home in Tynemouth. The train he had hoped to catch was due to arrive at Howden at around 9:06 p.m. and was known in most of the details of the story as the 8:45, as this was the time the train left Newcastle. So you will hear me say the 8:45, but that was just basically, as I say, the time it left Newcastle. George was taken by carriage to Willington Dean Viaduct, known to the locals as the Seven Arches, and here, for reasons known only to himself, he decided he would get out and walk across the bridge to Howden. The distance itself is not all that far if you are actually following the railway lines. However, the train was due in less than 5 minutes from the point where he set off, and I somehow don't think he would have made it in time, so I do wonder why he felt like it was a good idea. and when the 8:45 train arrived at Howden Station, there was no sign of George Joblin. Although the engine man and the fireman on the train thought there may have been something on the line as they had passed over the bridge, they had found no sign of any damage to the train at Howden and simply continued on their way. And it would be some passengers who had left the train at Howden heading back towards Willington Quay on foot who would find the body of Alderman George Joblin lying over the lines. An inquest into the death of George Joblin was held at the Ship Inn at Willington Quay before Coroner Cockcroft. Thomas Laidlaw said he was the coachman for Thomas Joblin of Point Pleasant. He said he had identified the body as being that of George Joblin. He said on Sunday, December the 8th, George had been dining with Thomas at his home. He had arrived between 4 and 4:30 p.m. and had left at around 8:30 to catch the 8:45 train from Howden to Tynemouth. Thomas said he had taken George to Willington Dean Viaduct by carriage. George had asked him to stop there and let him out as he said he planned to walk over the bridge to Howden. He said he watched George go onto the bridge. He was walking quite quickly, but was not running, and it was a fine moonlight night, and he said as he returned back to Thomas Joblin's house, he did not see any trains pass on the line. John Gordon said he was a watchman on the west end of Willington Dean Viaduct. He said George was known to him and he had seen him come onto the bridge. He said when George reached him, he had asked if he had enough time to get along for the train arriving at Howden, and John said he told him he did not think he would make it in time, but George replied saying, "I'll go along anyway and try." John said there was no one else on the line, and the train George was trying to catch was between Walker and Wallsend when he had set off on foot along the bridge. He estimated it would take between 2 and 3 minutes for the train to reach the point where George had set off, and around 5 minutes for it to reach Howden. He continued saying that there was 7 arches long on the bridge, hence the name the locals know it by as the 7 Arches, and he felt it would take a man around 5 minutes to walk from one side to the other. He said the train would usually reach Howden around 8 or 10 minutes past 9, but it was actually due to leave there at around 6 minutes past, so it was often a few minutes late. And he said it would be likely to pass George before he reached the other side of the bridge. He said part of his job was to keep people off the bridge, but he believed that Mr. Thomas Joblin had been given the privilege to walk across it, and his friends often did this too, but he was not sure if his friends were legally allowed to walk over the bridge. He said there was no footpath on the bridge, just the gap between the rails for the train and the rails on the sides of the bridge. And he said when George first set off, he appeared to be walking in the centre of the railway lines. It was mentioned at one point by someone else that George had been seen walking in the middle of the rail tracks, but he may have moved to the side once he reached further along the bridge, knowing that the train was coming, as it wasn't mentioned by the engine driver later. At this point, the man who was at the inquest representing the North Eastern Railway said Thomas Joblin did indeed have the privilege to walk across the bridge, but none of his friends did, so they should never be walking on the bridge. Roderick Rogers said he was a clerk and lived in Willington Quay. He said he had been one of the people who had found the body of George Joblin. He had left Newcastle on the 8:45 and had got off at Howden. From there he had walked back towards Willington Quay with his brother on the footpath beside the lines, and was pointing out here this is the footpath before you get to the bridge. He said just before they reached the bridge, 3 women drew their attention to something on the lines, so they went to see what it was. He said it was then that they found the body of George Joblin. He said he was lying on the rails on the down line, in other words, the line heading into Howden coming down from Newcastle. He said he was lying face down, and Roderick said his brother turned him over and checked to see if he was breathing, and declared that he was dead. He said he then went back to Howden to inform the station master of what they had found. Stephen Rogers said he was the brother of the last witness and he also lived at Willington Quay. He said he had found no signs of life when he had examined George and felt he may have been pulled down the track a little by the train. There had been no pulse and he could not hear any heartbeat when he had placed his ear to George's chest. Dr. Aitchison of Wallsend said he had examined the body of George Joblin. He said he was badly bruised and had many broken bones, including several ribs, his legs and ankles, and he felt the injuries were all the kind that you would expect from being hit by a moving train. He did not say how quickly death would have occurred, nor did he mention performing a post-mortem. Thomas Hall said he was the engine man of the 8:45 train from Newcastle. He said they did not sound the train's whistle when they were on the bridge as there was no crossing there, so there was no need to do so. He said he had been on the right-hand side of the train as they came onto the bridge and did not see anything on the lines, but when they arrived at Howden Station, he said the fireman on the train had said to him, "I think we may have hit a man on the bridge." Thomas said he didn't think so, as he didn't see or feel anything. But he said they still got out at Howden Station and examined the train before leaving and to continue their journey. He said they checked everything, including the wheels, but could find nothing, so did not mention it to anyone other than the plate layer, who had wondered what they were doing and had asked if they had lost anything. But he said they had told him they did not think that they had really hit anyone, as they could not see any signs of damage on the engine. Thomas said when they reached Tynemouth they still decided to check the train again, but they still found nothing. And he said they did not know about the man on the lines until the train after them arrived at Tynemouth, and they told them about the body being found. Thomas Stewart said he was a fireman on the 8:45 train from Newcastle. He said he had been standing to the left-hand side of the train when they went on the bridge, and he thought he had seen a man near the front of the engine. He said they had shut off the steam, as they always did at this point, then turned it on again, so it wasn't always easy to see in front of them. He said he was not really sure if he had seen the man or not, but he had mentioned it to Thomas Hall. His evidence after this was the same as Thomas Hall's with regard to checking the engine and then being told at Tynemouth of the death of George Joblin. No further evidence was given, and the coroner said there was little more to be said. All that was left now was for the jury to decide if the death of George Joblin was accidental. One of the jury said, "It seems George had no right to be on the line," to which another replied, "The watchman at the end should not have allowed him to pass." And this was replied to by another juryman stating, "But it seems the watchman had been used to letting these gentlemen, such as Thomas Joblin and his friends, pass onto the bridge." This, seems, the only brief discussion that the jury had before they reached a verdict of accidental death. George Joblin was buried in the family vault of Ersdon Churchyard on December the 12th, 1867. It was a private funeral with many family members in attendance, and it was said that houses close to his home had their blinds closed and many flags were at half-mast. The service was conducted by the Reverend R. F. Mason of Ersdon. I did not actually find any evidence of a headstone in Ersdon Churchyard for George or his family, but I haven't actually been there to have a more detailed look, so I may find something later. This was an incredibly tragic story. I have tried hard to understand why George felt the need to walk over that bridge. He had been in a carriage, and I'm sure he could have continued in this to Howden Station with no need to walk the bridge at all. But it was he himself who had asked the carriage driver to stop there and let him out. He was also aware that he might not make it in time, so why did he not wait at the start of the bridge for this train to pass, then catch the later train himself? I wondered if once he was on the bridge he had been hurrying or even running, and perhaps tripped and fallen onto the line just before the train arrived. But those who did see him said he was walking, not running. So did he simply not hear the train until it was too late and fell into its path as he had been startled by its arrival? I did also consider the idea that he had been taken ill and had passed out on the lines, but sadly, as the news articles I looked at did not contain post-mortem information, this is almost impossible to know. I honestly have to say this is one that I cannot figure out at all, but it is one that should never have happened. If only he had simply stayed in the carriage or waited to walk the bridge after the train had passed, he would not have died in such a horrific manner. But what do you think? Do you think he was running and tripped and fell and was not able to get up in time? Or do you think he didn't hear the train and the fright of it being right upon him made him stumble into its path? Can you think of any reason why he would have decided to get out of the carriage and walk across the bridge? Do let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I do hope that you have found this sad and tragic story interesting, and I do thank you all very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again very soon.